Hi, everyone. It's Hannah Fowler here again with the Red Skywalker podcast. And it's a delight to share this episode with you all. In it, I'm joined by a beloved healer, elder, firekeeper, mentor in my life, Greg Lathrop, who has impacted my path and my life in ways I don't quite have words for. We get into it a bit in the episode, so I won't go on too much, but I've gotten to know Greg through our work in the Conscious Dying Institute, through Emberlight. We were both part of the founding leadership team back in 2022. And then from there, our weaving together continued. Greg, as he mentions in this episode, he walked with Will Rockingbear. And I walk with Zoe Rockingbear. And Will and Zoe were partners in life and together held Earth Green Medicine Lodge. So I've had the immense gift of sharing time by the fire with Greg through many different ceremonial spaces, although in this episode he largely talks about time at Emberlight. But wherever I have spent time with Greg by the fire, it has shaped me in ways that are difficult to express. So it's an honor to introduce him to all of you. Many of you may know Greg who are listening, and you know what I'm talking about in terms of his ability to mirror and to see and hold a frequency of loving presence that really truly allows for healing and for miracles. Oh, and just for reference, I also mention as context Melissa. I mentioned the name Melissa, who is actually one of Greg's apprentices and is my dear sister and trauma mentor. So I wanted to share that as well, so you're not wondering who that is. You'll get to connect with Melissa on a future episode as well. So it was a joy, as always, to talk with Greg and to hear his stories, to talk together about how we can keep the fire in these times and what each of us can do within ourselves to pay attention and to keep that prayerful vigilance for the transitions in the world right now. So here we are, fire as medicine. I will give some context, if that's all right,
Yeah.
about how we came to know one another. And
Oh, yeah.
I guess that was through the Conscious Dying Institute, now called the Conscious Dying Collective. And then with the film, when I came to Asheville for the
Yes.
film, that's when we
Yes.
started to deepen our connection and relationship.
Mhm.
And then the early days of Emberlight, where we would gather at Edithi's in the
Right.
backyard and in the Raga room, that's when we really started
Yeah.
to connect.
Uh-huh.
And
Yes.
so I share all that so people know how we're connected. And then that,
Hmm.
of course, has shifted over the years. And primarily, I know you as a death doula, of course, through the Conscious Dying Institute, and as someone who has taught people how to sit at the bedside, of course, for years.
Hmm.
And I also have come to know you as a firekeeper. And so I was wondering if you would just share from your heart just what the fire, what your relationship is to the fire, and what you mean when you say fire as medicine, whether that's for holding the fire for people who are crossing at the bedside or people who are going up on the mountain for a vision quest,
Hmm.
just so those who don't know you and don't know what that means can learn a bit about that to start.
Okay. Well, um, well, I guess in order to talk about the fire, I'm gonna give a little history around how it came for me to to be here in that way. Um, History that you know about, and but maybe there'll be a part that has I haven't shared before. Who knows? But um, working in healthcare since I was 17 became fundamental for me. Working as an orderly while I was still in high school, um, and beginning to really see about what it is to serve others. Um, the first time I was ever called sir, so I was 17 years old, and I was helping this young boy. He had just had, I believe, appendectomy or some simple surgery that he had and needed help getting out of the bed on the day of post-op. And I was the orderly that came in to help him and literally picked him up. And he said, "Thank you, sir." I thought, sir, wow. He was so polite. And I was carrying him. So I learned a lot just by jumping in, really, um, to the essence of not knowing anything about um, what it is to really be with people in a very intimate time in their life when they're not well and need some help. And so that's where it started. Went on to become licensed as a registered nurse, and then went through a lot of the time of learning more about how to be with people. And as a young nurse in my 20s, I was very drawn to uh, the places where people were really sick and not well at all. So I ended up in critical care, and I ended up in emergency care, and then ultimately ended up on the helicopter as chief of an aeromedical team here in the area. And so all of that was, as Ram Dass would say, grist for the mill. It was all um, part of my learning. And there came a time when all of those passed away, and I ended up leaving the aeromedical team and into hospice. That seemed natural to me. However, everybody I worked with couldn't understand, how do you go from what you've been doing to hospice? And I said, well, I don't know. I'll let you know, because that's where I feel called to be. And so that was a step. And if we look at what begins to really show itself in my life, and I think in our lives, is um, the synchronous energy, the knowing where to be, even if I don't understand why I'm here, started to become noticeable to me. That I ended up in a place where I met a woman who was getting ready to retire. So I just basically crossed her path as she was leaving healthcare as a retired social worker, and I met her there. And I was just coming into hospice, and I ended up spending another 12 years in hospice. So I had that experience as well. But meeting her was the direct path to how I came to understand the opportunity for what I now know to call traditional indigenous medicine, or the traditional wisdom. Because she said, I believe there's a man you should meet. You may want to meet him. And it feels like that would be a good idea for you. And so she invited me to something known as a Vision Quest ceremony that was on the land here in these mountains. And I didn't know anything about what any of that meant, but I was willing to show up. Intuitively, I knew I need to be here. So I was there, and she introduced me to Will Rockingbear, and Rockingbear became my teacher. Our meeting was very nondescript. It was this kid, I felt like a kid, coming in, and she said, Will, this is Greg. Greg, this is Will. And I shook his hand, and he nodded, and he turned around and walked off. And that was how we met. But I knew that was important. I didn't know how. But that's how I started to come into the understanding of working with medicine in a different way. Very much in hospice was part of the synchronous energy of starting to let go myself of the body. Just my focus was so physiological and so much in the moment of every little detail of the body that now it felt like the learning curve was, now let's put that over here. Now let's get into that which is even beyond. And so I was starting to see that in hospice. And so meeting Rockingbear was as a way to see it even deeper outside of healthcare. And so that's how I was introduced to fire as medicine. He invited me into an apprenticeship with him, and I followed him for many years, 14 years until he crossed over. So I had a 14-year apprenticeship with Rockingbear. And that was primarily related to the Vision Quest ceremony that was offered each year, sometimes twice a year, for people who felt called. And it was in my Vision Quest where I now had entered into this relationship with Rockingbear, and I was I requested the opportunity to Vision Quest, and it was really an initiation into our work together. So I was sitting on a mountain in southwest Mexico for this Vision Quest, and what happened was I saw what the people were willing to do for me. These are people, I didn't know these people. I just made my way to Mexico and met him in a town square. Said, okay, where do we go now? So myself and others from Mexico that were part of that community that he was related to as well, we were going on the mountain. So I was escorted to my place on the mountain, and I was sitting there for 4 days and nights, fasting of food and water and simply waiting, and willing to be very watchful and prayerful. Waiting for what? I don't know. Waiting to see what I will see. And so what happened was I experienced a lot of things. What I'm going to focus on now is more directly related to your question, and that is a vision that I did have, a literal vision in my mind's eye while I was sitting on the mountain, was a 2-story farmhouse in a mountain river valley. And it was like a black and white photo. And I could see it clearly. And I said, well, and I knew what was going on there. What was going on there was the opportunity to remember about the medicine of working with fire, especially during the time of crossing. So the crossing time. Crossing time is actively dying time. So I just knew that that was something that was being placed in my lap. That this is something I could do. That it would be a good thing to do, to bring this back. Now remember about this, what we can do with this kind of medicine. And so I was very enthralled with the vision and very excited about it, and started working on trying to make it happen once I came back to the States. For the first couple of years, I was trying to make this happen, gathering community, creating the opportunity to do this work. And long story short, the doors just kept closing. And so I was becoming frustrated and a little disillusioned, and just a kind of, well, I don't know what all this is about. And maybe it was just a nice fantasy. And so I asked the great mystery, while I was frustrated about how this is not going, and about how am I going to make this happen. The answer was very quick and very deliberate and very loving. And the answer was, you are not going to make this happen. It's not about you all by yourself. It's more than that. It's beyond that. So if you will trust me, we will see some things. And I said, okay. And I was able to let go of it, let go of my attachment to how it's going to happen, and I was going to let go of my need to try to paddle upstream, turn around, keep my feet downriver, and just let the water carry me instead of trying to push it. So that was just an energetic thing that I felt, and I was aware of it, and I really could just let it go. And so as the story continues, I let it go for 22 years. And so 22 years of letting go. And I say 22 years because, as you know, what happened was I had come into relationship with Aditi and around her work, and we had done the work with Ethan's sister and the last ecstatic days, and all of that was happening. And so our relationship was really building as well. And so she closed on property in Swannanoa to do this work. She called Center for Conscious Living and Dying. And she and I had spent many years together before that, kind of visioning about how can things in healthcare be better. And so this is the outcome of it. And she said, well, Greg, I just closed on the property with our benefactor who is helping us to have this property. And I'm standing here by myself, and I would really, you haven't been here, you haven't seen it, and I'd like for you to see it. And I said, I can come right now. So I came out and I pulled in to the place, the house. I got out of the car and I'm standing in front of the house I saw 22 years before. So that was, interestingly, I didn't want to tell Aditi that right away. I wasn't sure if that might be a little too much information to begin with, but I certainly knew where I was standing. And that became when my roots became very deep there, because I knew exactly where I was standing. There was no doubt. And it wasn't an example of what I saw. It was home. Interestingly enough, I'd never been in that part of the county very much and hadn't seen that mountain river valley before. I did in Mexico. But so that's how I came to be at CCLD in the way that I have come to be there. And that is around the fire. Even with my nursing experience, as you know, I'm not there really to do that direct care volunteer work. I'm there to be a part of leadership and to be a firekeeper there for this medicine that was placed in my lap in a vision I had received earlier. So that's how I come to the fire. I come to the fire because the fire called me, in some, I would say. And being mindful of the synchronous energy of how far back can we go to connect the dots. A long way, because that goes all the way back to when I was 15 and had a near-death experience, thinking I was going to die on the highway, and I didn't. But that experience planted something in my conscious experience. My consciousness was expanded, shall we say. I didn't have an out-of-body experience, but it was a moment. An eternal moment, timeless, loving, peaceful awareness that could not be explained. So all of these things connect. There's no one thing that says, well, this is how that happened. It's everything. And so the fire for me is a medicine, a tool, a medicine, so that I can be fully present and aware. The fire helps me to do that. The fire for me is a grandmother. And it's rooted in the understanding of traditional indigenous medicine that relates to the interrelatedness of everything. That's fundamental. The interrelatedness of everything. Not just the humans, not just my ancestors, my blood ancestors, not just humans, but everything. Everything. And so when I become aware of that interrelatedness of everything, then I know that how I'm moving in this world is a way of affecting the field of everything. And I think that becomes important for us to remember the presence of awareness and how that shows up in the fire is grandmother is a reflection for me. So when I am allowing myself the gift of coming together with this grandmother again, and I'm coming and holding this, what am I holding? You know, that's, what are we holding? I'm holding my awareness of who I am. Who am I really? And knowing that that feeds the field, that feeds the field that connects to that fire. And the way what I say connects to the fire is the crossing fire is medicine, just like any other physical medicine, but this is a deeper medicine. And it's by permission. So the fire is not anything more than an invitation to know that there are people who are willing to hold themselves in a prayerful vigilance during a very sacred time of the last dying season we have in this world. I think we have many dying seasons, right? But as we are laying this body down, taking this garment off, this is the final dying season in our life. And the reason I say that is because I know you know that we all have dying seasons throughout our entire life experience here. And for me, the dying season is that place in between, that transitional place in between who I thought I was and who I would choose to be. Mm. And so really dying to me doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the body. It has to do with that transition in between. Oh, I thought I was this, but I'm not. Now who am I? And that's can often feel confusing, and it can feel not easy because there's a lot of unknowing. In our humanness, our ego likes to pretend like we know, but I don't think we do. Not really. And so it can feel challenging. So the crossing fire is to create that medicine for those who would like to have the crossing fire as part of their medicine. In the time of the crossing, I coming to the fire, I know I'm connected to them. I can feel them, and I can be with them, even in the non-local, and use that medicine for the opportunity to love them, to love. You know, people will ask me, well, what do you do at the fire? And my response is pretty simple. I keep the fire burning and I love everyone. And keeping the fire burning is easy. The practice is loving everyone and really diving into how does that unfold? Mm-hmm. What does that look like? When Greg says he's over there at the fire loving everyone. And there's not a whole lot of words that can be used about that, other than we can feel it when we're in it. And that's what I know to say about the fire. The fire is that relation of mine that helps me to remember about what's most important, and that is love. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the origin of what brings me sitting at the fire. Mm-hmm. At Emberlight. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing all that.
There's a lot of miraculous things, and we all have them in our life. Mm-hmm. But we can forget them
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really good to remember.
It's really good to remember.
Mm-hmm.
And I resonated with, I know you and I have talked about many of these things before, the similarities on the path. I know that's what brought me to hospice as well, was, well, it sounds like yours is more of a side effect. Mine was seeking that energy.
Mm-hmm.
I had an aversion to the physiology, the physical part of nursing, and I was drawn to
Mm-hmm.
that other space because so that's what pulled me to it.
Mm-hmm.
And like you, I felt so many of those things that you spoke of while sitting at the bedside was that remembrance of who we are that you talked about with your near-death experience of that energy that we are beyond our identities and our bodies, the the mirror of what's possible when we release and forgive. That was another big teaching for me by sitting at the bedside. The unity, the non-locality that you're speaking of, and the web. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm laughing, Greg. If you see my eyes dart to the side of you, it's because there's been a spider that is on the wall directly behind you doing a dance back and forth and back and forth. And now she's just perched right next to your head watching me for several minutes. So no
Oh,
coincidences that we're talking about
no.
the web. The
Well,
web.
the Soggy people or the Cherokee people in these mountains relate to grandmother spider and relate to grandmother spider in the way of knowing that she's the one that weaves the web that connects everything.
Mm.
So, so yes. So
Well, she's
welcome.
here. She's here, and I'm paying attention. She's very much present for this conversation. Something tells me she can hear me even though I have headphones in. She can hear you. I mean, anyway, so yeah, just all of these things, how to stay lucid in the dream. I was hearing you
Mm-hmm.
speak to that
Mm-hmm.
aspect as well of how to stay awake and aware. And for me, that was so much of what drew me to that space. The death care space, I guess you could say, was how to live in that way where you're present to those aspects, where you're not falling asleep and
Yeah.
and not waiting till your physical dying season to be able to turn towards some of those things. But how do you embody that in the day to day? And I feel that that's, I guess what I'm speaking to is I feel personally we're in a dying season collectively. I guess we always are. But right now we're seeing the collapse of systems and of all sorts, the fabric, the social fabric, the cultural fabric that many people have leaned on for this illusion of stability. And it
Mm-hmm.
seems to be crumbling, or it seems like the holes in the system are getting illuminated more and more as the ship is sinking. And
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to just talk about this, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
how this idea of how can we all be firekeepers
Mm-hmm.
in this time? How can we tend the fire individually for ourselves and for what's happening collectively when there's so much fear and so much discomfort? Because what I've seen, what I've noticed in myself as a doula and you as a firekeeper is that ability to move with the energy of the discomfort. And I've heard you say, take care of our fear. What does it mean
Mm-hmm.
to take care of our fear so we can get out of our own way and be present and remember what we're doing here? Remember service, remember love, loving presence,
Mm-hmm.
and not getting so distracted in the illusion of things.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you have anything that you want to share about that.
Well, sure. You said you talked about the lucid in the dream. And so, yeah, um, I remember a time when I had a series, uh, oh, uh, uh, multiple lucid dreams over a season, not a short season, probably, let's say a year. I noticed that I had lucid dreaming that was happening while my body was asleep. And it was something that felt like you talk about the fear and what is around us in that energy. When I realized that I was dreaming and my body was asleep and I could remain in the dream, whatever was going on in the dream became very present and no fear. Any fear I had in the dream went away. And I'm simply here. And I'm very excited because I'm going, wow, I'm dreaming and I am awake in the dream. And then I could play in the dream. I could play. So it became very playful. It was a playful energy instead of a frightening energy. even if it was weird, a weird dream stuff. But then it became the weirdness could be managed. It was just because we got all that stuff moving around in our psychology, in our psyche, and we're dancing with our fear quite often in our dreaming, and in some way or another, in a way of healing, I believe. But it's a way we're dancing with some of those fearful elements in our being. So when I became lucid, I realized I can do this consciously. Well, I didn't know what that even meant. We are consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental. That's what I have to start with. Consciousness is fundamental. The brain doesn't create consciousness. And I take responsibility for my words, for how I hold myself and walk in this world. But my understanding of in this work, in this life experience, is consciousness is fundamental. The brain doesn't create it. The brain receives it, and we move with it. And so that means that consciousness never dies. And so the lucidness in the dream became that place where I started really looking at that consciousness more and more deeply. Because remember, at 15, I already had an experience beyond normal waking consciousness that was much more expanded for a moment, but that moment was eternal. It was very noticeable. And so then the lucid dreaming stopped. I wasn't seeing it happening as much anymore. So I started working with techniques to see if I could start to create lucid dreaming on demand for myself. And so I was investigating and looking at all the many different ways that you can prepare yourself to enter into a lucid dream while you sleep. Mostly being aware during the day. One of those principles is in the day, just stopping and saying, "Am I dreaming?" Well, that didn't work very well because I realized I'm always dreaming. And what I mean by that was what I learned in my wanting to find a way to lucidly dream while my body slept and be awake in the dream. I was not, it wasn't happening. I couldn't make it happen. So I again had a little conversation with the great mystery, and I said, how can I make this happen? How can I create this lucidity that I'm craving in my dreams? And again, the answer was very loving and very direct. And it was a question. Why do you keep trying to go back to sleep? Now, I understood exactly what that meant when I heard it, because what it meant was take a look at what's happening right now. Like right now. In this waking dream. This is the lucid potential, to be lucid here, now. And that became a marker for me that I could really I could feel that. And I think all of us, even in our searching and in all the ways that we study and investigate and what can seem very intellectual and heady and trying to figure this out, so to speak. All of that starts to melt away when we can just feel instead of just think. I'm not sure how else to say that, but that presence of awareness is beyond thinking. It's just being present and here in a lucid way, to be lucid. And when we can do that, there's something I feel. I can feel the connection instead of thinking about the connection. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's where it comes. So that's in essence, I'm playing with in a big way when I'm keeping that medicine fire. I'm here, and we are here, and we are. There's no separation. So the lucid in the dream is a good thing to remember. So if you've ever had a lucid dream and you wonder about that, think about what it means to be lucid in the waking dream. You have the sleeping dream and the waking dream. And that lucidity can really be felt. Yeah, so that becomes an important part of what's going on in our being in this world. It's about also, all of this seems to relate very directly to something that is important for us right now in this world, I believe. And that is to really be aware of our intuitive knowing, rather than our thinking. And what I mean by our intuitive knowing, and I often use the phrase, I feel it in my bones, which means there's a part of me that knows, like it just knows. And am I attuned enough to follow my knowing? Or do I find a way to ignore it? So our intuitive knowing is what a lot of this seems to be about. To be in that state of presence that is our intuitive knowing. First of all, I will say it's not intellectual and it's not emotional. There can be some intellectual thing going on, and there can be some emotional things going on, but the intuitive knowing is deeper. It's an awareness that is much deeper than those other aspects of ourselves. And being willing to allow that intuitive knowing to help to lead me along. And like I say, sometimes my intuitive knowing might even create fear, that I have fear about something, but my knowing is this is still important. And so it's moving beyond the emotions into the actuality of what we know. Somehow that, I think that's important. You know, how does it help this world? Well, I don't know yet. But I can feel it in myself. And I've seen so many examples of that in the medicine work. One example in particular I'll share is holding a fire for a dear woman who was crossing at Emberlight, and we have a teepee for the fire as well. And when it's raining or when it's cold in the winter, and of course, we hold the fire day and 24/7 during that crossing time. So that becomes our vigil, becomes our work to be in relation with the ones who are crossing. And so this one afternoon, I had come back to the crossing fire. One of the other firekeepers was at the fire, and I was going to take over. And it was a rainy, windy, blustery day, very rainy. And I came into the teepee, and the teepee, the smoke of the fire was not drafting. The smoke of the fire was like right here, all the way down to the floor. And in a teepee, of course, the work is to have the draft pull it up through the top. And it was very unusual about how this smoke was just layered in there like that. And the other firekeepers that were in there were just talking about it's been this way all day. We cannot. I worked every part of the teepee I know to work, the flaps and everything. It's not drafting. And so I said, well, I'll take it from here. And there was another young man that was helping with the fire. And so he and I are just sitting there, basically just our eyes are just burning. And we are sitting with our hands over our face in this teepee. And I had already redone what I thought I could look at and to make it happen. And it wasn't happening. And so then I remembered, what are you here to do, Greg? You're here to keep a fire for this woman. Be present. Be here. Don't get distracted by all this stuff. Be here. And so in that moment of coming back into the presence of awareness deeply to become lucid again, I'm here. I had an intuitive knowing. And the intuitive knowing was, it's time to go check on her. So I told the firekeeper that was there, you keep the fire here. I'm going over to the suites and I'm going to check on her. I didn't know what I was going to check on. I just knew that was for me to do. So I went over to the suites to check on her. Her family was in the room with her, and they were doing 100% of her care. They really just wanted to do that themselves. And so the volunteers were holding space with them, but the family was doing their thing behind closed doors. And so I came in, presented myself, and said I'd like to try to visit with them. They said, well, I don't know if they want you to come in. They've been pretty private. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to knock and I'll take responsibility for it. And I knocked and I asked if I could come in. They said, sure, yes, you can come in. So I came in and she was sitting in the recliner facing the window, looking out into the field beyond the house. And I came and sat down at her side and I touched her hand and her hand twitched to acknowledge, I feel you. But she wasn't she wasn't conversational. She wasn't saying anything. She wasn't moving. But she was aware that I was there. And I was sitting with her and just watching. And what I noticed was she was not blinking. Her state of consciousness was, essentially obtunded or comatose, semi-comatose anyway. But she was so unconscious that she didn't have a blink reflex anymore. So I noticed that, and I asked the family, how long would you say that she's been like this and not blinking and not engaging? They said, oh, all day. And I said, okay, well, there's something that we can do. So let's help her to be more comfortable in her eyes. So a moist compress to her eyes to bring her eyelids down to help her to be able to have some comfort there. I said, I really believe her eyes are really hurting and we can do something about it. And they, oh, yes, of course, let's do something. That wasn't something that was thought about in their thinking. So that's what happened. And I came back out to the teepee and I sat down and the smoke was still about right here. And I turned to the other firekeeper and I said, I believe I know what's going on. And as soon as I said that, the smoke swirled and flew out the top of the teepee, never to return. And so even that kind of a connection is worthy of our being aware. Mm-hmm. Something like that. Mm-hmm. So simple and yet so noticeable. Mm-hmm. That there was something going on there that needed to be taken care of. And our intuition moves us.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And what I ended up doing there was I stopped figuring, right? Because I could have gotten distracted into all my figuring too,
Mm-hmm.
and made it all about everything that's physically happening. And there's something that needs to happen, change here. Well, apparently, no,
Mm-hmm.
not in this situation. So that points me to that intuitive knowing. Can we cultivate a lucidity that is available enough to us that we can become aware of our what we know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that will help us in this world.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. And we're going to see about that. But this is what I know to do,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems like nothing, but I think it's everything.
Yeah.
you know. For me, I have a great joy, and it's a blessing for me in this season of my life to know what to do for this world.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like that man is just sitting over there by himself, and often I am,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not by myself.
Yeah.
And I do think there's power in that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a potent story. I remember hearing that one from you, and it's beautiful to hear it again. There's so much that you shared, Greg, that I want to reflect some
Sure.
things back if I can.
Yeah.
This conversation around non-locality, like your interconnectedness, paying attention to the interconnectedness of the smoke and her state of being. You were also talking about thinking versus feeling, and that knowing in your bones and paying attention to your intuitive knowing. And I want to, so much of the Red Skywalker, I haven't talked to you too much about it, but in Mayan astrology and why I chose that name is it's all around bridging heaven and earth. And
Mm.
so much of what I know, where you and I connect is in when we talk about spirit and metaphysics. I know we love to get in the sandwich, so to speak, around that.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
favorite space for both of us, and and I'm just going to speak on behalf of myself and dear sister Melissa here, who has taught me to get in the dirt a little bit. For those who are listening, who, and I'll use myself as an example, who at times aren't able to connect to their intuitive knowing or aren't able to feel instead of think because of trauma. So I just want to talk a
Mhm.
little bit for those who are
Mhm.
listening about the trauma pieces here too, because
Yes.
to me that's the earthly part, that's the human part, that's the shadow part that I feel so much of this time is about bridging those.
Mhm.
And I know for myself it's been hard. I shared a little bit about this in the first episode, which is really just an introduction, Greg, of me talking about how I got to where I am and my path and my journey, and how so much of my deep dive into metaphysics and the interconnectedness of all the things kept me in many ways. I was connected to spirit and receiving knowings and messages and things. And then I would pinball into my head, because that's where, if you have a traumatized body, you shoot up to your head a lot of the times. Most people that I know who are walking with trauma live very much in their head.
Mhm.
Um, I think I shared that with you when I did that medical Qigong training. The teacher called it lollipop syndrome, where all the energy's in the head and no one knows how to bring it down and be in the body. And so I know for myself, it's been hard to even know what I feel or what I know when I'm not able, when I'm only in the thinking space. And so I just wanted to speak for myself and anyone who may be listening who struggles with that, the pendulum swinging between these states of unity, like knowing our interconnectedness, and then maybe pendulum swinging back into separateness, which, as far as I understand it, is a response to our trauma. I know for myself, it's hard to. My trauma responses have made me feel like things are black and white, and if I
Mhm.
can just get into that a little bit, um, you've known me when I was navigating relationships where there was a lot of manipulation, and I was kind of, that was a time of awakening for me, of like, oh snap, I've opened my heart to people who were not honoring that in a way. There was a lot of manipulation, some outright and very clear, I came to find out, and some was more insidious, and so it broke my heart that wasn't the first time I've experienced manipulation. I've experienced that since I was a kid in my own home. But that there was an awareness that was new around that. And my pendulum swing, I'm grateful for those experiences because they allowed me to wake up to have a bullshit meter, for myself, a detector, more around like when energies are matching words and when there is that alignment and authenticity when there's not. And a side effect of that was then I kind of othered myself from that manipulation, if that makes sense. Like I created a separation of them versus me. And it kind of flipped all that, everything I was studying in Course in Miracles or any of these spiritual texts, it flipped it on its head. And I was like, how can both of those be true? Is kind of what was my experience was. And in recent years, especially lately, Sister Melissa has been reflecting some things to me recently since my recent trip to Asheville of my own complex trauma web that I've needed to see, my own manipulation that's still present. And so I'm saying all that because it's very much about, for me, getting and being comfortable with the gray and not the black and white and not the right and wrong, but seeing, and all the clients that I've been supporting lately, my work is very much to see the whole of it, their innocence that they came into this world with, which is what I was tuning into, right? When I was deep in that exploration of metaphysics, when I was a hospice nurse 12 years ago or 11 years ago, whenever that was, all that is true. And also, all those adaptive behaviors have manifested in ways X, Y, and Z that can be pretty icky to sit with.
Mhm.
And so, how do I hold that lovingly for them? Of, I will love you and I'm not leaving you. And also, here are some manipulative behaviors that I'm seeing. And I got up my work, my intuitive knowing about my work today is that I need to hold up that mirror and name some of those things. And also, I won't leave you for it, but you got to look at some of that. And so I guess I'm naming that just to speak to the trauma pieces that I feel are important also to name. So people who are listening, because I've done that to myself, I'm like, dang it, why can't I stay there? Like, why can't I stay in that awareness, in that lucidity, and in that sweet connective space with spirit without plummeting then into my anxious thoughts or into the discomfort in my body, where sometimes I won't even be present. Like I'll dissociate because I'm filtering whatever the present moment is through the past and experiences of
Mhm.
my past. And so I feel that is my work. That is how I'm learning more and more to be clean, so to speak, when I hold the fire for other people, for those I'm supporting, is that's how I'm taking care of my fear, is to really look at all that stuff and love myself. You talked about loving people. I'm learning I can love people better, more deeply when I'm actually loving all parts of myself with
Absolutely.
honesty. So I just wanted to speak to that too, if anyone's listening and they're like, it's hard to do that.
I hear that. It's a constant vigilance. And that's, I think, why I know why the grandmother fire for me keeps me aware of the vigilant nature of what it takes for us to walk in this world. It's a vigilance, and because we're dancing with that our true nature, and we're dancing with that part of us that false idea of who we are that we call the ego, right? And so it's always there, you know. And um, what one of the elements of that has become very clear to me in this work is that looking at receiving love for myself from myself. That's what you're saying. To receive love for myself from myself. And if it makes it easier, you can have little s self and capital S self. But it's just right here waiting. It's just waiting to be embraced. And it's through that aspect of our awareness. And yes, it can be very challenging in this world. But that is the love I'm talking about. To be able to say that I am receiving love for myself from myself. Um, that's that's the vigilant work. Because once I have that, And maybe it's fleeting. And maybe it's not sometimes. But once I have that, then the extension of love is automatic. It just moves. Makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
If I can hold that, if I can be in that way of receiving love for myself, from me, then that moves to the ones I'm serving. It doesn't require anything else.
Right.
That's my understanding of it.
Absolutely.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we say love everyone, it has to start with me,
Mm-hmm.
because everyone else will be the benefactor of that just because I have found that in myself. I found the love that's waiting to be experienced. And of course, sitting with those who have those near-death experiences and really dive into that in a big way about the love that holds us. It's another aspect of remembering for me. So I do the things that help me to remember.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, and I'm fortunate in that,
Mm-hmm.
that I have come to the awareness of how important that is
Mm-hmm.
for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, that it's a priority.
Mm-hmm.
And that means things that are important to the ego start falling away,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and they're not things that really draw us so much anymore. But that loving energy, is that loving essence, is worth it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. Our trauma puts us in a space of, you know, of you know, I don't know what, you know, another aspect is, I don't know what anything really means. I can't. I mean, we're talking, and there are things that are coming through for me that I've said repeatedly, because yes, that is something that I know is worthy to hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
But I really don't know what anything means when you really look at it. You know, I can't say that I know that. I So I don't rely on the past to guide me, but that takes vigilance.
Yeah, and healing, like
Yeah,
for those with a lot of complex trauma, it's not,
yeah,
I think that's the thing that a lot of people in spiritual community, I think what I was trying to speak to before is they feel like, oh, why can't I do that? But it's not
I
as
know.
easy as a choice when it's wired in your body. And that's
That's
why
right.
it's important to sit with a witness like you, or
Yeah,
me or whomever, to hold that loving presence, to allow for the opportunities to rewire
yeah,
that experience in the body so you're not living through the past. So you can grieve the love that you didn't receive, that you deserved, that told you you were unworthy and unsafe and all those things. So you can actually choose consciously. But I do feel that's an important part for those with, not everybody carries that. Not everybody has developmental trauma or complex trauma. I think many do now, at least complex trauma, given the world that we live in. But anyway, that you're an example, Greg, of you've done a lot of that work, and so you can hold that, for people in a really good way, to keep that fire, to hold that awareness until people can come into that more themselves.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think that we go back to the "Am I lucid?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that becomes one thing we could put in our pocket
Mm-hmm.
for the times when we go, why can't I do this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because once I'm lucid in the dream, all of that stuff starts falling away, at least in the moment. This is not to be Pollyanna, to talk about how this is, I know I hear it completely what you're saying. about that.
Well, I think it can stick. I think that's what I'm trying
Yes.
to say is
Yes.
when you're able to land in your body, that's what I'm learning for myself more and more and more. The more I'm able to ground in my body by inhabiting my body as a safe place in ways that I wasn't able to when I was a kid, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
then it doesn't have to be so fleeting. It doesn't have to be the pendulum swing. It doesn't have to be an awareness that then leaves. So
Mm-hmm.
it is possible. I think that's why I'm speaking to the importance of that healing work. It is possible.
Mm-hmm.
I feel at least I'm learning more and more.
And loving ourselves is being gentle with regards to
Yes.
all of that,
Yeah.
right? Of course,
Yeah.
to allow that love to move
Mm-hmm.
creates that gentleness with ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and really just am I lucid, and just am I here? And if I'm having to ask that question, I've noticed, then I'm not
Mm-hmm.
until the question arises. And it can be something that becomes noticeable to us and as a way of coming back into the only reality there is,
Mm-hmm.
which is right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so simple as hard, really,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Uh, it really is. It's come back, come back, come back to here. But believe me, uh, we all do it. And we fly off again. We fly off again, fly off again, you know? And we just, can we allow ourselves the, the awareness that that's a human thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're going to do. And, to me, to me, love is freedom. And it's coming in right now to say that because of what we've just been talking about. Love is freedom. And freedom in action is mercy, which remembers innocence. So can we come to the innocence, even if for a moment, and let that be? And we feel it when we feel it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's to feel it, you know, not to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that. I mean, and that's to me, that's the bridge. It's like that's the exact medicine that heals. They're one and the same. That's what brings us
Mhm.
into awareness, and that's what heals so that we can stay more in that state of awareness, that love, that innocence.
And if we find our the opportunity to cultivate this, the reality is it's often easier for me to do that for someone else than it is
Mm-hmm.
for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes the transformative path.
Mm-hmm.
So serving love and service,
Mm-hmm.
there's that's the reason that's been spoken about for a long time. Love and service, to love and serve. You know, and I do like what Emberlight has, where we emerged in the vision. It's a grand vision that everyone awakens to the power of love and service, and it's beautiful and it's grand, and it's probably most organizations would never touch that as a vision for themselves because it's just what just it's interesting to think about that in other organizations I've been in, thinking, oh, they'd never go there. But I do believe it at this time in this world, this is important for us to remember,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, service helps us. And my understanding, my experience is it helps me ground into and anchor that bigger prayer, that shared
Yeah.
focus that I hear you talk about. That's why it's
Yeah.
so easy to do that when we're caring for those who are dying, because it's right in your face. It's right in the middle of the fire. Like you said,
It's
it's
right
right
here.
there. It's right here. Yeah.
It's right here. And so I acknowledge that. It,
Mm-hmm.
it requires the willingness to know that. I can be at my highest vibration when I'm actually serving someone else rather than sitting in a cave by myself. And that's just me. And I know that. And so sitting in the cave of the fire gives me that service. I'm doing it for a very specific focus. I have the one or more people that I can say, this is for you. And also for me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's beautiful. Will you indulge me for old time's sake? Will you do the clap that I've come to know and love so much for the benefit of all beings?
Okay. I don't know how this even happened, but it did. It happened. Now it's become this thing. It's a simple principle, one that is known by many who are probably listening to that, and that is everything I've gained from this practice that we have just done, I offer for the benefit of others to transform suffering. So that's how I see the web. Okay. And so the way I started doing that with the support groups and those who are caring for the dying is on 3, not before 3, not after 3. We clap and release this into the world. 1, 2, 3.
Greg, I love you. Thank you for this.
I love you too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, you go well, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you for sitting with us by the fire. Thank you for participating. I hope you received something from that conversation. And if you're listening to this in July of 2026, when this is released, there will be a community conversation on July 30th. If you feel called to sit with me and Greg in real time and share reflections or ask questions and just be in this dialogue together, that's what these community conversations are for. And I lovingly welcome and invite you to join that. If you go to redskywalker.school, you can click on community conversations and you'll see where those are listed, where you can sign up for those, and they correspond again to each episode that's released. So it's a way to be in dialogue together as a community instead of just listening. So I hope you can join us. It will be a sweet time. And if you're new to the School of the Red Skywalker, there are many other ways to get involved. You can check out the website and join the mailing list, which is a great way to stay in the loop about upcoming monthly circles and the community spaces that are being cultivated here, as well as how to work with me one-on-one and join upcoming courses like Coming Home and retreats and workshops and things that are held throughout the year. So please check it out, redskywalker.school, and I really look forward to seeing you soon. Okay, until next time.
Hope is what brought me to you. Hope is the car